Well, it was a year ago today that President Biden said it looks like inflation is going to be temporary. As we know, it seems to be perpetual, continues to go up. And in the wake of that, our Democratic colleagues are still contemplating through the reconciliation process adding additional taxation and God knows what else. One day we think they're going to leave taxes alone, which of course would preserve the 2017 tax bill. The next day they're not so sure. And then they seem to be pivoting some days toward socialist price controls for pharmaceutical products, coupled with Obamacare funding. So it's pretty unclear where they're going, but they're desperate to pass something on a party line basis as rapidly as possible. That's, in all likelihood, bad news for the American people.
Well, if you're an American in this last year and you didn't get a 10% pay raise, you had a de facto pay cut. Because as was pointed out, the leader mentioned, inflation has been coming in hot, really hot, 9.1% year over year. And if you look at that, how that impacts across different products that people have to buy on a daily basis, groceries are up on average 12%, utility gas on average up 38%, and gasoline that you buy at the pump is up almost 60% year over year, and almost 90% since President Biden took office. And so a lot of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and in many cases having to either put things on their credit card or dip into their savings if they have any, but it's put a tremendous economic strain on families in this country who continue to struggle with the impact of this extraordinary run-up in inflation. And of course, it all got started over a year ago when the Democrats passed their $1.9 trillion tax and spending spree. In that case, it was just a spending spree. But it's the textbook definition of too many dollars chasing too few goods. So the economy got overstimulated. They flooded the zone with so much money, and the American people are feeling the impact of it today. And so what is their solution? It's to spend more and to tax more. As the leader pointed out, the Democrat position on taxes seems to evolve from day to day, but the one thing we know is they want to raise taxes, they want to grow and expand government, and how much is only subject to how many ever Democrats they can get to vote for this, which right now, thankfully, is only 48. But for the American people, fear what could happen if the Democrats are able to get the last two to get on board with some sort of a tax increase. I think that would be just a disaster for the country. And so we're going to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. There wasn't a single Republican that voted for the $1.9 trillion spending spree last year, and there won't be a single Republican that votes for any kind of a tax increase this year. And so as we look at what's left of the year, we think about, the reconciliation bill. They continue to talk about it. Every time I think it's dead, it's like a zombie. It keeps coming alive. It is alive. And so we're just going to have to, until September 30th, do everything we can to ensure that the American people don't have to endure yet another tax and spending spree that would further worsen the inflation problem and make it that much harder for them and their families to get by.
7 Republican senators have just come back from a trip to the southern border. We went to once again see firsthand the crisis at the border. It's a crisis, a humanitarian crisis. It's a crisis of our national security, and there's a crime crisis as well. We also went to thank the border agents who are there every day doing their job when the president is quick to criticize them for doing the job that they were hired to do to protect our nation. When it comes to the southern border, Joe Biden is missing in action. We went on midnight patrol with the border agents, and we came upon group after group after group of illegal immigrants coming into the country. Most heartbreaking were 2 little 7-year-old girls in this larger group of others, they were unaccompanied by adults. They were not related to one another, and they were afraid. All they had with them was the clothing on their back and a little plastic bag, and in the bag were names and addresses of contacts in New York. And what we found nearby were little bracelets that they'd been told to remove, and the bracelets are paper bracelets, and they identify the cartels and the amount of money that was paid to transport them to the United States, where they would be delivered and dumped at the United States border unaccompanied. That's what we ran across. And that's what border agents are coming across night after night, day after day, in overwhelming numbers, huge numbers. You talk to the border agents and you say, why is this so much worse than it was before? And as they say, it's the policy of catch and release that all these people coming to the country illegally say is the invitation from Joe Biden to come, and they will never, ever have to leave. 3 million so far in the Biden administration, about 1 million gotaways, people that have vanished into the fabric of America. And it's not just the number of individuals who are coming here. It is also the drugs that many are bringing with them. How much drugs? Well, the border agents have seized record amounts, but yet lots still get through, to the point that today in America, the #1 cause of death of adults, the #1 cause of adults under the age of 45 in America, it's not COVID. Oh, no, it's drugs, illegal drugs. Fentanyl, so much of it brought into the United States from the southern border, 100,000 in the last year. And the money from all of these drugs, what happens to that? Well, it fuels the crime, the gangs. How much money? Well, the border agent said the profit for the cartels from this dealing, the amount they make in a week is more than the budget of the Border Patrol for a year. It's a very profitable business. Now, Joe Biden hasn't been to the border since 2008, and that was just a drive-by. It's time for him to go to the border, to see the carnage that he has brought onto our nation. It's time for him to go to the border and listen to the Border Patrol agents and learn firsthand what they can tell him and how they can solve the problem. And he needs to take those actions. But Joe Biden's never going to go to the border, not ever, because he knows if he goes, the national press will follow him. And then you will report to the nation what you're seeing. And he won't be able to hide any longer from the death and destruction that his dereliction of duty has brought to this nation.
Well, for 50 years now, if your house was on fire or somebody was breaking in, most Americans have been able to call 911. For about the last 5 days, Americans now, if they have a mental health crisis or they're considering suicide, can call 988. It was a priority of the last Congress. We put money in the appropriations bill to do this. It's a combination of 200 different agencies that allow you, when you call 288, to be connected immediately with a mental health professional. In 2020, the last numbers available, 60,000 people in America committed suicide. That's one suicide every 11 minutes. In June of 2020, there was a study, and 11% of all adults said they had seriously considered suicide in the previous month. Suicide's the biggest cause of death for people under 35. All the natural causes put together of death don't equal suicides for people under 35. So either dialing or texting 988 allows you to talk to somebody who knows what they're doing and help you and can help you get in a better place. It's a big step forward. It's a big problem. It's a growing problem. It's something that this Congress was committed to, and even a little more money was put in the Safer Community Bill that we passed about a month ago.
The trip to the border this last week was very educational, and I had visited the border several years ago in the Trump administration, and we saw the different policies that were being implemented at that time. What I saw on this trip to the border was infinitely worse. What we saw was the policy of catch and release, where we encountered a number of groups, and as Senator Barrasso had described, these two little girls who were afraid and alone. It was very appalling. Each one of them, it had cost their family $8,000 each to traffic them across the border. But we also heard stories from the Border Patrol agents about just a few days ahead of that, another 5- and 6-year-old that had been trafficked to the border. Only in that instance, those that had been smuggling those little girls had brutally sexually assaulted them, 5 and 6 years old, so badly that emergency medical response personnel had to be called. And this is not a rarity. About 30% of the women and girls that are being trafficked up to the border are sexually assaulted by the coyotes. And those are the ones that report. And Border Patrol estimates that it is twice that amount that are actually assaulted, so about 60% of those women and girls. This is appalling. And yet we have an administration that's really complicit by continuing to encourage people to be smuggled to our border with an open border policy. We really have to assist our Border Patrol agents protect the borders of our nation and make sure that we're not encouraging catch and release. It only encourages people to send their children up to the border to release them into the United States. And all along the way, those coyotes, those smugglers know and understand they can do whatever they want to those humans that are being pushed to the border with no repercussions. And they're just becoming wealthier and wealthier. The second issue there that is impacting Iowa directly is the issue of methamphetamine and fentanyl. I-35 ran right up through that sector of the border and comes straight up to Iowa. My communities are being impacted by methamphetamine. Every state is now a border state, and we're seeing the impacts of the border crisis in real time every day in our communities.
So this is what's costing Floridians. Almost $800 more a month because of Biden's inflation. So you've got families that are having to choose gas or food. You've got people putting off their retirement. You've got people taking second jobs. People coming out of retirement because they can't afford this. Gas is up, food's up. I don't get the Biden administration. There's nothing they're doing. They're not fixing the border. They're not dealing with inflation. There's no action there. We have to balance our budget. We've got to quit spending money. We've got to become energy independent. These are not that hard. We've got to reduce regulation, reduce permitting. We've got to get more companies to compete so we get prices down. But there's not one action by the Biden administration that's going to drive down inflation. So if we keep this up, what's it going to be next year? Is it going to cost them another $2,000 a month? But this number is even higher if you take from the day Joe Biden got elected. This is just the last 12 months. It's impacted people all across my state, and I'm sick and tired of the Biden administration doing nothing.
Jeff?
Good afternoon. Is $52 billion will break this off with the chips and maybe some other things? Is that too expensive, and do you think that your Republican members will go along with that, or are you going to turn this around and say, oh, this is extra spending, this contributes to inflation?
Well, I think there are obviously different points of view in our conference. I'll get to that. There's some who believe that chips only plus a tax measure is what we ought to do. Others who think it ought to be broader. What I understand, and you all might know this better than I, that the majority leader has basically said, depending upon how big the vote is on the motion to proceed will determine what kind of package he puts on the floor. For myself, you wanted to ask me for myself, I'm not going to vote to proceed until I know what we're proceeding to. But there are others in our conference who may decide otherwise. So it's up to the majority leader. I'd love to be the majority leader myself again, but I'm not. Well, it is a national, I do believe the CHIPS thing is a national security issue of significant proportions, significant.
The House is voting today on the respect for Marriage Act with Senator Schumer sets over that for a vote. Have you decided how you will vote if Senator Schumer puts it up for a vote? And will you be lifting your numbers one way or another to vote for it?
Yeah, I'm going to delay announcing anything on that issue until we see what the majority leader wants to put on the floor. Yeah.
Going back to this so-called CHIPS Plus idea.
Yeah.
I hear you on the motion to proceed, but are you open to, I guess is the question, to adding additional elements to that bill beyond just CHIPS? Are you open to a CHIPS Plus?
I voted for USICA the first time it went through the Senate, so I'm obviously aware of the importance of this. But I want to see what we're voting on because I'm assuming it's not going to be open for amendment. And I'll make a decision then as to how I'm going to vote. Yeah.
You opened this press conference talking about inflation. I'm curious, if you're majority leader in a few months, what specific steps would you take legislatively or otherwise to combat inflation?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. We'll quit the spending spree. They can't seem to restrain themselves. And I don't think there's any question among any serious economists in the country as to why we're suffering from 9% inflation. As Larry Summers, as Jason Furman, both of whom said that at the time. I think clearly when you're in a hole, you quit digging, and we'll not be doing anything remotely like that.
It's politically perilous for Republicans to vote against a prescription drug pricing bill.
Well, I think everybody can make the decision for themselves. And my own view is socialist price controls are not the way to get a healthy pharmaceutical industry. They produced a modern medical miracle with 3 highly effective vaccines in less than 1 year. This is a remarkable American success story, our pharmaceutical industry. And I don't think socializing prices, that is, putting the government in charge of this, is a way to continue the kind of healthy, effective pharmaceutical industry that saved the lives of millions of Americans. And most experts think that to the extent that you do this, the price you pay later is fewer cures, shorter lives.
To follow up on that, will you support the Collins Shaheen bipartisan amendment on insulin pricing? I'm sorry, the bill on insulin.
Yeah, I haven't decided. Yeah.
At least one Senate Democrat has talked about taking away Joe Manchin's gavel as the Energy and Natural Resources Committee chairman. If you were to caucus with the Republicans, was there a chance you could chair that committee?
We'd be glad to have that discussion with him anytime. Yeah.
If Donald Trump launches another run for president, how will you handle that? Will you oppose his candidacy? Will you stay neutral? What is your position?
Look, I think we're going to have a crowded field for president. I assume that most of that will unfold later, and people will be picking their candidates during a crowded primary field.
You have expressed a willingness to look at reform efforts to the Electoral Count Act. As early as tomorrow, they're going to be introducing a bill.
The Electoral Count Act does need to be fixed.
Will you support this bipartisan?
It needs to be fixed, and I've been in constant touch with Senator Collins and sympathetic with what she's trying to achieve. Thank you.